Welcome to Stories with Steve, a podcast on the Central Buna Podcast Network. Every Thursday in 5 minutes or less, we'll lift you up with stories of how God works behind the scenes in our lives. Romans 8:28 tells us that God works all things together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. Now with an encouraging story, here's Steve.
So there's a popular song that came out in the late 1980s called Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. And I always kind of thought that Bono should have rewrote the song, or actually he should have done a sequel to the song called I Finally Found What I'm Looking For. That's kind of the story of my life. You know, I was searching, but I really didn't know what I was searching for. Just kind of a brief biography about myself. I grew up, my parents were in a small town, but they divorced when I was very young. And I actually barely remember my parents being married. And so that was kind of hard as a child. You don't really understand that. Later on, I found out all the things that go along with it. But that's just kind of a brief biography. And then we moved to Houston. And so my mom got a better job. And so she was a single mom, working hard, raising 3 kids. And all through school, I was kind of looking for my identity, like a lot of kids are, trying to find out what I'm good at. I wasn't really that good in school. I struggled with math. I had to have a special tutor. Back then they didn't really have things like dyslexia and all that. They just kind of put you, you needed help, they put you in a tutor. And I remember just going home feeling like I was stupid. I wasn't as smart as the other kids. And also when I went further along in school, I tried to find identity through sports, played football and dramatics, just trying to find out who I was. Well, coming up to my freshman year in high school, that was a pivotal year in my life. It was a kind of a chaotic year in my life. I actually attended 3 different schools during that year. I attended a school in Houston, and then my mother remarried, so we moved to a school outside of Houston, Sugarland, which is a huge high school, one of the biggest in Texas at that time. And things weren't going really well at home then. My mother's marriage wasn't going well. My sister, they were having all kind of problems. And so I decided I want to go live with my dad. And actually, I went to more live with my grandmother because she was the one that really invited me to come live with her. And she said one thing: I'll do anything for you if you'll go to Sunday school and church with me. And I'd been to church as a kid, but I never really understood what it was all about. And frankly, I was kind of bored. So I went to church with her and a little bitty church out in the country. But there was one summer that they had an evangelistic crusade, and I went every single night. It was 7 nights. And I just sat there and I was just amazed. All of a sudden the gospel became to light to me. I began to understand who Jesus was and what he did for me on the cross. But it was kind of like a spiritual tug of war in my life, that tug between the world and just trying to find who I was. And I remember one night in church, I just felt so convicted. I talked to the pastor and about giving my life to the Lord, but I just walked outside of church. And I remember still that night looking up at the stars at night. And maybe the pastor said something because an older gentleman followed me outside, and he said, young man, let God have his way in your life. And I just remember that so vividly. And I remember just one night by my bed, I gave my life to the Lord. And of course, I was baptized and as a new Christian. And I ended up moving back with my mom again, reconciled, moving back to Houston. And my high school years were really, really growing in the Lord, and I ended up going to a Christian college. But I just think about how we're always searching for something, and we don't know what we're really, really searching for in our lives. So maybe you can relate to that and your story. Let me know in the comments. And remember, you've got a story to tell.